The subtle laugh was almost worse than an outright rejection. Reed Hastings watched John Antioco, the CEO of Blockbuster, lean back in his chair, a look of pity on his face. This was a king entertaining jesters, and the joke was a $50 million punchline that only Hastings and his partners seemed to understand. They were offering the future on a silver platter, and the man with 9,000 stores was about to push it away to make room for more late fees. It was the year 2000, inside the gleaming Renaissance Tower in Dallas, the corporate heart of a global empire. Blockbuster Video wasn't just a company, it was a cultural institution, an invincible titan of home entertainment. Its blue and yellow logo was as recognizable as Coca-Cola's script. The phrase, "a blockbuster night," was woven into the fabric of American life. And John Antioco, a sharp, seasoned retail executive brought in from Taco Bell and Circle K, was the man who had perfected the formula. He sat at the head of a long, polished table, surrounded by his lieutenants, men who understood logistics, real estate, and the simple, brutal economics of supply and demand. Across from them sat Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, two men from a different planet called Silicon Valley. They weren't retail guys, they were data guys. They had flown in from California with a radical proposal. Their small, struggling company, Netflix, would become Blockbuster's online arm. They would run Blockbuster.com, leveraging their mail-order DVD system to bring the video store into the internet age. In return, Blockbuster would promote Netflix in its thousands of stores and acquire them for $50 million. Hastings laid out the vision, a symbiotic relationship, the physical and the digital, hand in hand. A customer could rent a movie online and, if they wanted, return it to a physical Blockbuster store. The possibilities were endless. It was a bridge to the future, and it cost less than the fleet of jets Blockbuster used to fly its executives around the country. Randolph watched Antioco's chief financial officer, Ed Stead, who barely suppressed his smirk throughout the presentation. The Blockbuster team didn't see a bridge to the future, they saw a leaky raft with a ridiculous business model. Randolph would later recall the moment the meeting cratered. John Antioco leaned forward and asked, with genuine curiosity, "How's it work? The business model? How do you make money?" Hastings explained the subscription model, a flat monthly fee, unlimited rentals, 3 DVDs at a time. The key, he stressed, was no late fees, ever. That was the moment the energy in the room shifted from polite curiosity to outright dismissal. The Blockbuster executives exchanged glances. A video rental business with no late fees? It was like trying to run a casino where the house never wins. It was absurd. What they failed to grasp was that this single point was not a bug, it was the entire feature. The philosophy of Netflix was born from a moment of pure customer rage. In 1997, Reed Hastings, then a successful software entrepreneur, had rented the movie Apollo 13 on VHS from his local Blockbuster. Life got busy, and he forgot about it for 6 weeks. When he finally returned it, he was hit with a staggering $40 late fee. On his way to the gym that day, ashamed and angry, he had an epiphany. The entire Blockbuster model was built on a foundation of conflict with its own customers. Forgot about it for 6 weeks. When he finally returned it, he was hit with a staggering $40 late fee. On his way to the gym that day, ashamed and angry, he had an epiphany. The entire Blockbuster model was built on a foundation of conflict with its own customers. Their greatest profit center was also their greatest source of resentment. What if, he wondered, a video store worked like a gym membership? A flat monthly fee, and you could come and go as you please. No penalties, no shame, just entertainment. That idea became Netflix. To the men in the Dallas boardroom, however, late fees weren't a source of resentment, they were a work of genius. In the year 2000 alone, Blockbuster would collect over $800 million in late fees.
This wasn't just some ancillary revenue stream, it accounted for a staggering 16% of their total profits. It was pure, high-margin cash. Their entire financial structure depended on customers making mistakes. Their business model wasn't just renting movies, it was punishing procrastination. From their perspective, Hastings and Randolph weren't just naive, they were proposing corporate suicide. The laughter, when it finally broke through, was a natural reaction to what they perceived as an insult to their intelligence. They politely, almost condescendingly, showed the Netflix founders the door. The meeting was over. Mark Randolph walked out into the Texas heat feeling utterly defeated. Hastings, however, was quiet. He understood something the Blockbuster team, blinded by their own success, could not. He realized they weren't just in different businesses, they were in different centuries. To understand the sheer magnitude of Blockbuster's blunder, you first have to understand the empire they commanded. By the early 2000s, Blockbuster was a behemoth, operating on a scale that was difficult to comprehend. At its zenith, the company operated 9,094 stores globally, employed over 84,000 people, and served 65 million registered customers. They were so ubiquitous that 70% of the American population lived within a 10-minute drive of a Blockbuster. Their market capitalization hovered around $5 billion. They were a logistics and real estate powerhouse.
Their core competency wasn't film, it was moving plastic boxes around the planet with ruthless efficiency. They had perfected the art of the new release wall. Through lucrative revenue-sharing deals with Hollywood studios, they could flood their stores with hundreds of copies of the latest blockbuster hit: Titanic, Gladiator, The Matrix. This system created the illusion of infinite choice, but it was a carefully constructed facade. The average Blockbuster store stocked around 2,500 unique titles, overwhelmingly skewed towards new releases. The profit margins on older, catalog titles were slim, and shelf space was precious. So if you wanted to watch The Godfather or an obscure foreign film, you were often out of luck. Their business was built on the ephemeral thrill of the new, the impulse purchase on a Friday night. It was a wide but shallow pond. And this model worked spectacularly well. For over a decade, Blockbuster crushed every competitor. Mom-and-pop video stores vanished. Rival chains like Hollywood Video were locked in a perpetual struggle for second place. Blockbuster was the undisputed king, and its castle was built brick by brick on a physical, tangible reality. You could walk in, hold the box in your hand, talk to a clerk, and walk out with your movie. It was immediate, it was simple, and it was massively profitable. What Blockbuster saw as their greatest strength, their physical footprint, was precisely what Netflix identified as their greatest vulnerability. Hastings didn't see 9,000 stores. He saw 9,000 expensive, inefficient warehouses with limited inventory, high overhead, and staff who had to enforce a customer-punishing fee structure. Netflix, by contrast, had no stores. It had a handful of massive, centralized distribution centers located near major postal hubs. An employee at one of these centers could pick and pack hundreds of DVDs per hour. The overhead was minuscule in comparison, and most importantly, their shelf space was virtually infinite. Their website could list every movie ever made on DVD. This was the concept of the long tail, a term later popularized by writer Chris Anderson. While Blockbuster made all its money on the head, the few dozen massive hits, Netflix discovered it could build a sustainable, powerful business by serving the tail. The thousands upon thousands of niche films, documentaries, and older classics that were unprofitable for Blockbuster to even stock. This was made possible by Netflix's true secret weapon, a piece of technology that Blockbuster either didn't know about or didn't care to understand: the recommendation algorithm. It was called Cinematch. From the very first day a customer signed up, Netflix began learning. It prompted you to rate movies on a 5-star scale. Did you love Braveheart but hate The English Patient? Cinematch logged that. It analyzed the ratings of millions of users, finding statistical correlations invisible to the human eye. It learned that people who loved a certain obscure Finnish comedy also tended to love a specific 1970s action film. Blockbuster's recommendation engine was a teenage part-time employee who might have seen the latest Adam Sandler movie. Netflix's was a burgeoning artificial intelligence that was mapping the entire genome of cinematic taste. This data-driven approach gave Netflix an almost supernatural advantage. When a customer added a new hit movie to their queue, they might have to wait because of limited supply. But Cinematch was always ready with a suggestion. We don't have Spider-Man right now, but based on your ratings, we are 98% certain you will love Dark City. And more often than not, it was right. Hit movie to their queue, they might have to wait because of limited supply. But Cinematch was always ready with a suggestion. We don't have Spider-Man right now, but based on your ratings, we are 98% certain you will love Dark City. And more often than not, it was right. It could steer customers towards movies that Netflix had in abundance, the long-tail titles, keeping them happy while they waited for the new releases. It turned a potential supply chain problem into a delightful discovery experience. It was a level of personalization that a physical store could never, ever replicate. Blockbuster was in the business of guessing what a city wanted to watch. Netflix was in the business of knowing what you wanted to watch. The operational elegance of the Netflix system was another source of its power. The iconic red envelope was a masterpiece of engineering. It was designed to be handled by the U.S. Postal Service's high-speed automated sorting machines. The weight was calculated to the fraction of an ounce to qualify for the cheapest first-class postage, which at the time was just 33 cents. The turnaround was remarkably fast. A customer would mail a DVD back on a Monday. Netflix's distribution center would receive it Tuesday morning. A custom-built optical scanner would read the barcode through the envelope's clear window, instantly registering its return and triggering the system to mail out the next movie from the customer's queue. That new movie would often be in the customer's mailbox by Wednesday. For a flat fee of around $20 a month, a movie lover could have a steady, rotating library of films delivered directly to their door. Back in Dallas, the Blockbuster executives saw none of this. They saw a clunky, slow process. Why would anyone wait 2 days for a movie when they could just drive 10 minutes and get on right now? They completely misjudged the psychology of their own customers. Directly to their door. Back in Dallas, the Blockbuster executives saw none of this. They saw a clunky, slow process. Why would anyone wait 2 days for a movie when they could just drive 10 minutes and get one right now? They completely misjudged the psychology of their own customers. They failed to understand that the pain of the Blockbuster experience, the drive, the search for a parking spot, the discovery that the movie you want is out of stock, and the ever-present threat of the late fee, was far greater than the pain of waiting a day for the mail. Netflix wasn't selling DVDs. It was selling convenience. It was selling discovery. It was selling freedom from punishment. It was a fundamentally superior value proposition. But the Blockbuster team, locked in their boardroom, couldn't see it. Their entire history, their every success, was rooted in the physical world of retail. Their worldview was that the internet was a fad, a niche business, as one executive reportedly called Netflix. They believed that when people wanted a movie, they wanted it now. That single fatal assumption about consumer behavior, an assumption that had built their empire, was about to become the architect of its destruction. They laughed at the $50 million offer, confident in their dominance, unaware that the 2 men walking out of their building had just started a clock, and it was ticking down to 0 on their entire existence. They laughed at the $50 million offer, confident in their dominance,
unaware that the two men walking out of their building had just started a clock, and it was ticking down to zero on their entire existence. The flight back to California was a study in contrasts. Mark Randolph was despondent, convinced their last best hope had been snuffed out by corporate arrogance. But Reed Hastings was energized. The rejection hadn't been a failure, it had been a clarification. He now knew with absolute certainty that Blockbuster's leadership was fundamentally incapable of seeing the future. They weren't just going to be a competitor, they were a target. He had offered them a lifeboat, and they had chosen to stay on the Titanic, convinced it was unsinkable. Now Netflix's mission was no longer just to survive. It was to build a better boat and wait for the iceberg. Survival, however, would come first. The year 2000 bled into 2001, and the digital world Hastings had championed was consumed by a firestorm. The dot-com bubble burst with spectacular violence. Companies that had been worth billions were suddenly worthless. Pets.com, Webvan, Cosmo. The landscape was littered with the corpses of ambitious internet ventures. Capital dried up. Investors who had once thrown money at any idea with a .com in its name now fled in terror. Netflix was caught in the inferno. They were hemorrhaging cash, and their path to profitability looked impossibly steep. They were forced into brutal rounds of layoffs, at one point letting go of a third of their workforce. The $50 million offer that Blockbuster had laughed at began to look like a king's ransom they could only dream of. During this dark period, the company's survival depended on its single-minded focus on its core system. While other internet companies had been burning cash on lavish Super Bowl ads and brand-building extravaganzas, Netflix had been obsessively refining its machine. Every available dollar went into making the service better, faster, and smarter. They expanded their network of distribution centers, cutting the average mail time from 3 days down to 2, and then, in many metro areas, to a single day. The user interface on the website was constantly tweaked and A/B tested to make it easier for customers to find movies and manage their queues. But the real work was happening inside Cinematch. The recommendation algorithm was the company's soul, and it was getting smarter with every single user rating. By 2002, Netflix had collected over 200 million ratings. Cinematch could now predict with unnerving accuracy how much a specific user would enjoy a movie they had never even heard of. It was a weapon of mass personalization, and it was a weapon Blockbuster didn't even know was being built. On May 23, 2002, in the smoldering wreckage of the dot-com crash, Netflix did the unthinkable. It went public. It was a gutsy, almost defiant move. The IPO was modest, raising $82.5 million. Most on Wall Street were skeptical. Here was a company that mailed DVDs in a world that was still reeling from internet hype. A company whose primary competitor was a 9,000-store gorilla. But the IPO forced Netflix to disclose its numbers, and for the first time, the world could see the relentless, methodical growth. In early 2002, they had just over 500,000 subscribers. By the end of the year, that number would climb to 857,000. By the end of 2003, it was 1.5 million. By the end of 2004, it was 2.6 million. It wasn't explosive, viral growth. It was something far more terrifying to an incumbent. It was steady, predictable, and accelerating. It was the remorseless logic of a superior model steadily gaining traction. While Netflix was fighting for its life and slowly building its army, Blockbuster was basking in the golden afternoon of its empire. John Antioco was celebrated as a retail genius. He had successfully introduced video games and candy to the stores, boosting in-store revenue. The company's profits were strong, buoyed by the hundreds of millions in late fees. To them, Netflix was a gnat, an irrelevant niche player in a different market. Their eyes were on a different digital prize.
In 2000, the same year they laughed Hastings out of their office, Blockbuster announced a landmark 20-year exclusive partnership with Enron Broadband Services. Yes, that Enron. The deal was to create a true video-on-demand service streaming movies directly into customers' homes. On paper, it was visionary. Blockbuster would provide the content and the brand. Enron would provide the revolutionary fiber optic network to deliver it. The press releases were glowing. This, Blockbuster declared, was the future. The partnership was a catastrophe. Enron's technology was mostly vaporware, a promise built on a foundation of accounting fraud. The service was tested in a few select cities and barely worked. The bandwidth required was enormous, the quality was poor, and the whole enterprise was impossibly ahead of its time. When Enron collapsed into the biggest corporate scandal in American history in late 2001, Blockbuster's grand video-on-demand strategy evaporated with it. They had bet their entire digital future on a house of cards. The failure left them with a deep institutional skepticism of streaming, viewing it as a technologically unfeasible and financially ruinous pipe dream. They had tried the future, it had failed spectacularly, and so they retreated to the comfortable, profitable present of their physical stores. Even if they had wanted to pivot aggressively to an online model, the very structure of their empire made it nearly impossible. A significant portion of Blockbuster's stores were owned by franchisees, independent business owners who had invested their life savings into their local Blockbuster. These franchisees paid royalties and fees to the corporation, but they owned the stores. The idea of Blockbuster Corporate launching a competing online service was an existential threat to them. Why would they promote a service that encouraged their customers to stay at home? Any move Blockbuster made to compete with Netflix Online would be met with outrage and potential lawsuits from its own franchisees. The company was trapped by its own success, a prisoner of the very business model that had made it rich. By 2004, however, the net had become impossible to ignore. Netflix had over 2 million subscribers and was adding hundreds of thousands more each quarter. Wall Street was taking notice. The narrative was shifting. Suddenly, Blockbuster's inaction looked less like strategic patience and more like terminal complacency. Panicked, John Antioco and his team finally decided to fight back. They launched Blockbuster Online, a direct, shameless clone of the Netflix DVD-by-mail service. The price was similar, the model identical. But they believed they had an ace up their sleeve, the one thing Netflix could never match, their 9,000 stores. They launched a program called Total Access. The concept was simple. Rent a movie from Blockbuster Online, and when you returned it by mail, you also received a coupon for a free in-store rental. It was an attempt to finally build the hybrid physical-digital model that Reed Hastings had proposed to them 4 years earlier. To fund this new war, Blockbuster made a fateful decision. They realized they couldn't compete with Netflix's core promise, no late fees, while still charging their own customers exorbitant penalties. So, in a stunning reversal, Blockbuster announced it was eliminating late fees across its entire system. The decision was heralded in press releases as a pro-consumer move, but internally it was a declaration of financial suicide. The $800 million annual cash cow, the river of high-margin profit that propped up their entire business, was slaughtered overnight. The goal was to starve Netflix of new subscribers and drive them out of business. Press releases as a pro-consumer move, but internally it was a declaration of financial suicide. The $800 million annual cash cow, the river of high-margin profit that propped up their entire business, was slaughtered overnight. The goal was to starve Netflix of new subscribers and drive them out of business. John Antioco was willing to burn hundreds of millions of dollars a year to win. He believed Blockbuster's sheer size and financial might could sustain the losses, while the smaller Netflix would surely buckle under the pressure. It was a classic miscalculation of the enemy. Blockbuster thought it was fighting a price war. They poured over $200 million into marketing Blockbuster Online, convinced they could win on brand recognition and brute force. They saw Netflix as another video rental company. Reed Hastings knew he was in a completely different business. He wasn't just mailing DVDs, he was building a data-driven logistics network. While Blockbuster was spending a fortune on advertising, Netflix was investing in its 6th, 7th, and 8th distribution centers. While Blockbuster was redesigning its stores, Netflix was hiring PhDs in mathematics to refine Cinematch. Blockbuster was using a sledgehammer, trying to smash its competitor. Netflix was using a scalpel, precisely dissecting customer preferences and optimizing its supply chain. The war had begun, but the two armies weren't even on the same battlefield. Blockbuster's Total Access program was a logistical nightmare. Store employees, already overworked, were now tasked with processing online returns and handling coupons, a system for which they were poorly trained and equipped. The customer experience was often clunky and confusing. More importantly, the financial drain was immense. The company's profits cratered. The elimination of late fees tore a massive hole in their balance sheet, and the cost of acquiring each new online subscriber was astronomical. The king had finally come down from his castle to fight the upstart in the fields, but in doing so, he had set his own castle on fire. The cracks were beginning to show, not just in their profits, but in the very foundation of their 40-year-old business philosophy. Astronomical. The king had finally come down from his castle to fight the upstart in the fields, but in doing so, he had set his own castle on fire. The cracks were beginning to show, not just in their profits, but in the very foundation of their 40-year-old business philosophy. The war of attrition that John Antioco had initiated was having an effect, but not the one he intended. Netflix's growth did slow. For the first time, they were facing a well-funded, direct competitor that had the power of a ubiquitous brand name. The pressure on their stock price was intense. But Reed Hastings had something Antioco didn't: a unified company with a single, clear mission and a board of directors that understood the long game. Blockbuster, on the other hand, was a house divided, and the man who had set the fire was about to get burned. The chief antagonist in Blockbuster's internal drama was not Netflix, but a man named Carl Icahn. A legendary corporate raider and activist investor, Icahn had built a massive stake in Blockbuster, and he was furious. He saw a company torching its own profits to chase a competitor in a low-margin business he didn't understand. He viewed the elimination of late fees not as a strategic necessity, but as an act of managerial insanity. To him, Antioco was a CEO who had taken the company's single greatest cash-generating asset and thrown it into a bonfire. In 2005, Icahn launched a vicious proxy battle to seize control of the company's board. The fight was public, personal, and brutal. Icahn attacked Antioco's strategy and his multi-million-dollar compensation package. Antioco fought back, arguing that the investment in Blockbuster Online was the only way to secure the company's future. The Civil War paralyzed the company.
Continue from battle to seize control of the company's board. The fight was public, personal, and brutal. Icahn attacked Antioco's strategy and his multi-million-dollar compensation package. Antioco fought back, arguing that the investment in Blockbuster Online was the only way to secure the company's future. The Civil War paralyzed the company. While Netflix was singularly focused on improving its service, Blockbuster's leadership was consumed with boardroom battles and shareholder revolts. In the end, Icahn won. He didn't oust Antioco entirely, but he gained several seats on the board, enough to effectively seize control of the company's strategic direction. His mandate was simple: stop the bleeding, end the expensive war with Netflix, and return the company to its profitable roots. One of his first moves was to effectively dismantle the no late fees policy, replacing it with a confusing program called No More Late Fees, which automatically sold customers the movie if they kept it too long.
Customers hated it. The brief period of goodwill Blockbuster had generated was erased, replaced by confusion and renewed resentment. More critically, Icon's board hamstrung John Antioco. They saw Blockbuster Online as a money pit and drastically cut its funding. The marketing budget was slashed. The plan to integrate the online and in-store experiences was abandoned. Antioco, the architect of the counterattack, was now a general with no army. The final straw came in 2007. Frustrated and stripped of his authority, John Antioco negotiated his exit from the company. But his fight with Icon had one last bizarre chapter. Antioco's contract stipulated a massive bonus if he achieved certain performance metrics. Icon's board disputed the payout. The battle over Antioco's multi-million-dollar golden parachute became another distracting public spectacle. While Blockbuster's executives were arguing with their former CEO over a bonus, Reed Hastings was standing on a stage preparing to detonate the world they knew. On January 16, 2007, just 1 week after Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone, Netflix announced its Watch Now service. Streaming had arrived. It was, at first, a modest offering.
The library was small, only about 1,000 titles, mostly older movies and TV shows. The quality was far from high definition, and you had to use a Windows PC with Internet Explorer. But it was a profound, fundamental shift. The physical object, the DVD, the very thing the entire decade-long war had been fought over, was suddenly on a path to irrelevance. For the first time, entertainment was becoming pure data. The service was offered for free to existing Netflix subscribers. It was a perk, a value add. But Hastings knew it was the future. He famously declared that the iconic red envelope, the symbol of his company's success, was merely a transitional technology. He was already planning for its obsolescence. Netflix began pouring hundreds of millions of dollars not into distribution centers, but into licensing deals with studios and building the massive server infrastructure needed to deliver video over the internet. Blockbuster's response was a catastrophic display of corporate inertia. Having been burned by the Enron disaster years earlier, their leadership was deeply skeptical of streaming. Carl Icahn, a man who understood balance sheets and cash flow better than anyone, saw streaming as a business with no assets and monstrous costs. Where was the profit in paying studios billions for content you didn't own to deliver it over networks you didn't control? It made no sense to him. The new CEO they brought in to replace Antioco was James Keyes, a former 7-Eleven executive. Keyes was a brilliant retail operator. He knew how to optimize supply chains, manage inventory, and maximize in-store sales. He was the perfect man to run Blockbuster in 1995. In 2007, he was the worst possible choice.
Keyes looked at the rise of Netflix and a new pesky competitor called Redbox with its automated DVD rental kiosks, and he concluded that Blockbuster's problem wasn't a flawed business model, it was a branding problem. He believed the stores were tired and needed a refresh. He doubled down on the physical retail experience. He focused on improving store layouts, selling more candy and popcorn, and pushing video game rentals. He famously argued that Blockbuster's core customer was not the tech-savvy early adopter streaming movies, but the family who wanted a one-stop shop for a Friday night movie experience. In an interview, he dismissed Netflix as not even being on their radar screen in terms of competition. He compared the threat of Netflix streaming to the threat of the U.S. Postal Service to FedEx. It was a fundamental, almost tragic misunderstanding of the paradigm shift that was occurring. He was trying to redecorate the rooms on the Titanic while the water was pouring in below deck. While Keyes was rearranging the candy aisle, Netflix was colonizing the digital world. They moved with relentless speed, forging partnerships to embed their Watch Now button onto every device imaginable. First, it was the Xbox 360, instantly giving them access to millions of gaming consoles already connected to televisions. Then came the PlayStation 3, the Nintendo Wii, Blu-ray players from Samsung and LG, and a host of internet-connected TVs. Then, in 2010, they landed the ultimate prize, the Apple iPhone and iPad. Almost overnight, Netflix transformed from a service you used on your computer to a utility that was everywhere, on every screen you owned. The friction of watching a movie was reduced to a single tap.
The idea of driving to a physical store, searching for a movie that might not be there, waiting in line, and driving home seemed in a span of just 24 months archaic and absurd. Blockbuster eventually tried to respond. They acquired a small streaming service called MovieLink and launched their own on-demand platform. But it was too little too late. Their offering was clunky, their library was anemic, and their business model was a mess. They tried to graft a digital service onto a physical retail mindset. They offered digital rentals for a per-transaction fee, a model that felt punitive compared to Netflix's all-you-can-eat subscription buffet. They were still thinking in terms of discrete individual sales, while Netflix was building a long-term, data-rich relationship with its customers. The final desperate act was Blockbuster On Demand, a service that was supposed to be integrated into set-top boxes and TVs. But by the time it launched, Netflix was already a household name, its app a default icon on millions of devices. Blockbuster wasn't just late to the party, they arrived after the building had been torn down. The numbers told the brutal story. In 2010, Netflix's subscriber count soared past 20 million. Its revenue was climbing towards $2 billion. Blockbuster, meanwhile, was in a death spiral. Its stock price, which had been over $30 a share in the early 2000s, fell below $1. It was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. The debt it had taken on to fight its various battles was crushing. The franchise owners, once the bedrock of the empire, were going bankrupt in droves. Store after store went dark. The once vibrant blue and yellow signs became symbols of urban decay. The company that had once commanded a $5 billion market capitalization and employed over 84,000 people was now a zombie, staggering toward an inevitable grave. On September 23, 2010, 10 years after they had laughed Reed Hastings out of their Dallas headquarters, Blockbuster LLC filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The king was dead. The cause of death wasn't a single event, but 1,000 cuts inflicted by a competitor they never truly understood, and a self-inflicted wound born of arrogance and a catastrophic failure to perceive the future they had been offered for a mere $50 million. The bankruptcy filing wasn't an execution, it was a mercy killing. The company was drowning in nearly $1 billion of debt. The court proceedings revealed the true depth of the rot. Plans were floated to save a smaller, leaner version of the company, perhaps a few thousand stores. But the market had moved on so decisively that even this seemed like a futile gesture. The brand that was once synonymous with home entertainment was now synonymous with failure. In 2011, Dish Network, the satellite television provider, bought the remnants of Blockbuster at a bankruptcy auction for $320 million. The hope was that the brand name still held some value, that it could be integrated into Dish's own subscription services. They kept a few hundred stores open, a ghost fleet of a once mighty armada. But it was no use. The cultural moment had passed. Continue from bankruptcy auction for $320 million. The hope was that the brand name still held some value, that it could be integrated into Dish's own subscription services. They kept a few hundred stores open, a ghost fleet of a once mighty armada. But it was no use. The cultural moment had passed. Trying to keep a video rental store in 2012 was like trying to sell horse-drawn buggies after the invention of the automobile. One by one, the remaining stores were shuttered, their blue awnings taken down, their shelves stripped bare. By January 2014, the last of the corporate-owned stores in the United States closed their doors for good.
The empire of 9,094 stores was gone. Netflix, meanwhile, was ascending to the throne. The death of its old rival was barely a footnote in its meteoric rise. Having conquered the distribution of content, Hastings set his sights on the final frontier, the creation of content. He understood that the long-term vulnerability of his business was its reliance on Hollywood studios for licensing. The same studios that had once seen Blockbuster as their primary partner were now growing wary of Netflix's immense power. They began demanding higher and higher fees for their movies and TV shows. Hastings saw the end game. The studios would eventually pull their content and launch their own streaming services. The only way to become truly independent, to control his own destiny, was to become a studio himself. In 2011, Netflix made a bet that was, in its own way, as audacious as its original DVD-by-mail concept. It outbid established television networks like HBO and AMC for the rights to an American adaptation of a British political drama called House of Cards. The price was a staggering $100 million. But the true gamble wasn't the money, it was the method. Armed with a decade of data from Cinematch, Netflix knew things that traditional networks could only guess at. They knew that a huge number of their users loved the original British House of Cards. They knew that films starring Kevin Spacey were consistently rated highly by their subscribers.
And they knew that movies directed by David Fincher had a massive, devoted following within their user base. The data showed a powerful statistical overlap between these three distinct categories. For a traditional network, greenlighting the show would have been a high-stakes gamble based on the gut feelings of a few executives. For Netflix, it was a calculated investment based on a powerful predictive algorithm. They took another unprecedented step. Instead of ordering a pilot episode, they commissioned 2 full seasons, 26 episodes, right out of the gate. And when they released the first season on February 1, 2013, they upended a century of television tradition. They didn't air 1 episode per week, they dropped all 13 episodes at once, available to watch instantly. In doing so, they didn't just launch a TV show, they invented a new cultural phenomenon, the binge watch. It was a move perfectly attuned to the on-demand, user-controlled ethos they had pioneered. House of Cards was a colossal success, both critically and commercially. It won Emmy Awards, drove millions of new subscriptions, and instantly established Netflix as a legitimate creative force, on par with the most prestigious studios and networks in Hollywood. It was the final decisive victory. Blockbuster had built an empire on controlling the supply of plastic boxes. Netflix built its empire by analyzing the demand of human desire, and then, ultimately, by manufacturing the product that satisfied it. The story of Blockbuster's demise is often simplified as a tale of technology, of a physical company being replaced by a digital one. But that's only part of the truth. It's more fundamentally a story about corporate imagination, or the lack thereof. Blockbuster's executives weren't stupid. John Antioco was a skilled retailer. James Keyes knew how to run a 7-Eleven. But they were all trapped within the paradigm of their own success. They saw their business as renting out physical objects from physical buildings. All their data, all their metrics, all their expertise was centered on real estate, logistics, and in-store foot traffic. When presented with a new model, subscription, no late fees, data-driven recommendations, streaming, they didn't see an evolution. They saw an alien species whose biology they could not comprehend. Their fatal error was believing they were in the video rental business. Reed Hastings understood from the beginning that he was in the entertainment delivery and customer data business. The DVD was just a temporary delivery mechanism. The subscription was the key to gathering data. The data was the key to understanding the customer, and understanding the customer was the key to everything.
Blockbuster had millions of customers, but it knew almost nothing about them beyond their rental history for the past week. Netflix knew what movies you loved, what movies you hated, what actors you followed, what genres you explored late at night. They knew what you watched, when you watched it, and on what device. They knew when you paused, when you rewound, and what scenes you skipped. They aggregated this data from millions of users, building a mosaic of global taste that was the most powerful competitive advantage in the history of entertainment. The ultimate irony is that Blockbuster had all the pieces to win. They had the brand recognition, the customer base, the Hollywood relationships, and the cash flow. In 2000, for the price of a rounding error on their balance sheet, they could have owned Netflix outright. They could have owned the algorithm, the subscription model, and the team that was obsessed with the future. They could have seamlessly integrated Netflix's online system with their 9,000 stores, creating the unbeatable hybrid model Hastings had pitched them. A customer could have added a movie to their online queue, and if they wanted to watch it immediately, an app could have told them which nearby Blockbuster had it in stock. They could have returned online rentals to the store. They could have used their massive retail footprint as a marketing engine for their digital service. They could have owned the entire ecosystem, but they couldn't see it. The laughter in that Dallas boardroom in 2000 was the sound of an empire signing its own death warrant. It was the laughter of men who were certain they knew how the world worked, who saw a $50 million offer for their online future as a punchline. They were blinded by the glare of their own success, addicted to the easy money of late fees, and trapped by a business model that was simultaneously immensely profitable and fundamentally hostile to its own customers. They thought they were selling convenience, but they were actually selling a chore. Netflix saw that anger, that friction, that simple human annoyance with a $40 late fee for Apollo 13, and they built a new world on top of it. Today, a single Blockbuster store remains in Bend, Oregon. It operates not as a viable business, but as a tourist attraction, a living museum of a forgotten era, a nostalgic monument to the hubris of a king who was offered the future and chose to laugh instead.